it's easy to see, like when you go to a wedding, most weddings, traditional weddings, those spaces that are created are different. I can hear the boys as soon as we're done with the ceremony that have been sitting out watching this, leaning over to their dad saying, when I get my sword, when do I get to go through that? So they recognize the significance. We want to make sure that the boy understands that there's a point where dad is not going to stop teaching them or guiding them, but they're going to have to learn to take more responsibility. So many of us, if we're not very intentional, just one day wake up and realize our son's about to graduate and we have so many things we needed to teach them, to pass on to them, and then we've just not redeemed the time.
Super excited to get into this topic of ceremony today, guys. That's where we're headed. So let's go. Hey guys, welcome back once again to the Next Man Up podcast. So good, as always, to have you along with us for another episode. I am Mark Stanifer, your host. Honored to be with you once again today. Today we're going to get into the topic of ceremony, and to help us do that is a returning guest by the name of Eric Browning. Eric, like you and me, is just a regular dude by day, but in the evenings and on the weekends, he transforms into this leader of an organization called Sand to Stone, which is all about helping fathers to take their boys on a journey, an intentional journey involving outdoor and adventure and camping and hiking and all kinds of things outdoors to help fathers guide their sons intentionally on this path to manhood. Now, a number of episodes back, actually episode 166 and 167, was when Eric first joined us. And we spent a lot of time talking about what it means to be a man, Eric's story, a little bit about the organization that he operates and what they do. But we both felt like we had left the topic of ceremony or rite of passage, initiation, sacred space, as you'll hear us get into. Feel like we left that on the table as opportunity to come back to. And so for this episode, that is exactly what we're doing. As I said, I'm super excited to share this topic with you and to invite you into this discussion that Eric and I have as inspiration and motivation for you to step into this role with your son and guide him along his path to manhood. Okay, well, that's enough from me. I'd rather you hear it from the discussion and from Eric himself. So let's get into it. Here's Eric Browning, founder of Sand to Stone, and our discussion about ceremony. Well, Eric, what an honor to have you back on the show. It's good to see you. It's been a bit, but when we finished the last episode, you and I were like, hey, we're not done with this conversation. We need to go a little bit deeper into this topic that we're going to get at today. So thanks for coming back and joining us for round two.
Man, I am so excited to be here, and I appreciate that, Mark.
So if you recall, we didn't get to this idea of ceremony very, very deeply when we talked before. We had a great conversation. We covered a lot of ground, but you and I both felt like we had left that on the table. And so today we're going to come back and get a little deeper into this idea of ceremony. But before we do that, I wanted to kind of set it in context. Because as you know, we've traveled a bit, both you and I. It's been a while since we've connected. So I went back to your website. By the way, listeners, sand2stone.us will get you there, sand2stone.us. I went back to the website and was reminded again just how aligned we are with this idea of fathers taking their sons on a journey to manhood. Now, we use initiation, we use rite of passage kind of interchangeably, but for listeners who maybe have joined us more recently, the idea is an intentional process to lead your son from boy into manhood, and then celebrate when he's arrived and welcome him into the community of men. I had forgotten just how much we are aligned on that as the goal until I was reading through some of the text and the copy that you have on your website.
Man, yeah. One, I'm thankful for that because, one of the things that I want to do is to try to create a standard, a biblical standard, try to communicate a biblical standard for what manhood is. So when I feel like I'm connecting with someone that's halfway across the U.S. That feels the same way and is drawing the same conclusions from what they're reading from the Bible, that, man, that's super encouraging.
So just to give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about, here's some text that I pulled off directly from your website. We believe it is of utmost importance for the fathers to lead their sons along the path to manhood and mark their transitions in very memorable ways. That's one. Here's the other. Today, we're missing the markers, better known as ceremonies and rites of passage, found in many non-Western cultures, which define manhood, they set expectations, they fortify prior training, and they encourage healthy exercise of the man's roles. Like, in many ways, that's language that is uncommon today. Now, you and I spend enough time in this space to be familiar with it and fluent with it, but honestly, Eric, I think many people don't. And so that's why I wanted to just pause here and set this topic in the broader context of an intentional process to take your boy from boyhood into manhood that we call a rite of passage or an initiation. Non-Western cultures, as you know, still do this, and our ancients used to do this, but unfortunately, along the way, the last couple generations, we have societally evolved past it in the West. And I think you and I are both on a mission to help fathers recover this tool and put the tool back in their toolbox.
Well, and I'm sure you have read this as well, but, a pre-industrial revolution, our fathers we worked a lot, the fathers worked near the home. And the boys oftentimes just worked alongside the father, learning the trade.
That's right.
And, Paul David Tripp, when he talks about parenting, he says, it's not those long lectures you're going to give your son or daughter that is going to somehow change them. It's going to be the 1,000 little tiny moments that you have with them that over time will impact them, along with the Holy Spirit, of course, working in their life. So I think about that in context of pre-industrial revolution. I mean, how much time did fathers have with their sons as they worked alongside one another? It was way more than what we have now. I mean, oftentimes the fathers are 20 to 30 or 40 miles from the home. They're leaving early, getting home late. Half the kids don't even know what their dads do. And they're missing all these opportunities. I mean, I was thinking my dad learned about the birds and the bees on a farm because his dad was pointed out a cow having a baby. And it's all of a sudden, well, now we can have this conversation. It's just natural,
right,
to do that, So, since the invention of kind of big corporation and cars and that sort of thing, it has really put a wrench in the naturalness of father and a son working alongside, and the father being just a natural mentor along that pathway. So we're left with things that maybe are more confusing than anything. I mean, I'd have to say that I just thought I became a man because I became 18 years old and could technically leave the house, or I felt like maybe getting my driver's license was one step towards it. Of course, those are important times to mark in a person's journey, but it doesn't replace the fact that boys need they need direction in what it means to feel like a man and to act like a man. And it's only a man that can do that.
I remember standing in front of a room of parents a few years ago, asking them the question, when does a boy become a man? And I was standing at a large whiteboard and I had a marker in hand and I was writing their answers as they were tossing them out. And I went down one column and down another column, and I think probably into a third column before people stopped tossing out answers. And I turned around and looked at the group and I said, here's the problem. We have no clear indication for our boys of when they become a man. And this is the problem that we as dads need to step into and solve. These were things like you were talking about, milestones, significant milestones, driver's license, turning 18, going off to college, having sex for the first time, getting married, like all these different markers that sometimes can get out of order, but significant markers and milestones in a boy's life. But none of them really definitively bestow manhood. And to your point, it can only be done from another man. And so anyway, just as you were talking about that, I was back in that room with those parents, illustrating the point, and part of the point that we're trying to make here. The rite of passage or initiation process can fill that void that the boy needs, even before they realize they need it. And our dads, us men, are in the perfect place to be able to do that. But we need to know what it is and we need to know how, because our dads didn't know and they didn't know and their dads didn't know, all the way back to this pre-industrial revolutionary time. And so that's why this language, this wording sounds foreign to our ears until you get immersed in it and get captured by what's possible here when you lean in as a dad and offer this to your boy.
Well, I agree with you. And I think, from an idea of ceremony and rite of passage, if I could use it synonymous for now at least, there's this kind of idea that I know my dad had to go through some sort of process to become a man, because I look at him and I go, well, he's clearly a man. Now, how do I become a man? I think in our culture, the way it is that there's so much confusion. I mean, from gender confusion to feminism and in toxic masculinity and all of that it's just, men these days don't know they're up from, the right from the left and up from down. So you've got that problem. Then you've got the general problem of men not necessarily connecting in community as much. Yep. And so there's not this collective feeling or knowledge of what manhood is. There's not a definition that the community at large can agree to your point, which you just said when you're getting a whole list of what it means or when you become a man. So there's just not that available to us. So one of the things that's so important with any sort of ceremony, I think, and what lends itself so nicely to what I do with these events where we have men together in the outdoors, is you have this community of men together that are all a part of the ceremonies that we do and that can celebrate alongside the boy as he's graduating or going from marker to marker. But then you have the boy that can look out and be like, well, gosh, it's not just my dad that's a man, but he's a man that believes these things along with all these other guys that believe these things, and it's a collective kind of, hey, we all stand for this, and we're going to celebrate with you around these characteristics and these points that are important for a man, to exemplify in his life, for the roles that he is to play as a man. So I think that's huge.
Yeah. And Eric, I'd like you to keep going, because I found it important to just kind of put definitions around the words that we use. We've been talking a bit about rite of passage and initiation and ceremony, but go a little bit deeper. When you think of ceremony in the context of how you're working with dads and sons, what does that mean for you? Give us a picture of what that is.
It's easy to see, like when you go to a wedding, most weddings, traditional weddings, those spaces that are created are different. They're not like going to the supermarket. That's a very common space where very common things of buying and selling and all that happen. This is a much different space when you're at a wedding. It's a sacred space. And so ceremony is and should be done in a sacred space. I think about like when Moses was traipsing about and came across a burning bush and was kind of blown away by this bush that was burning up. And then all of a sudden you heard this voice say, take off your shoes. This is holy ground. This is a sacred space. God was about to do something special in that moment for Moses. And he wanted him to understand that it wasn't just, this isn't just regular life. We're not just going about doing everything right. We're going to do something that's going to be memorable. And so there was a setting of the stage, so to speak, for a memorable moment that was not just something that he could talk about later, but something that was going to transform him. And we know what God did with using Moses then to take the people of Israel out from under the bondage of the Egyptians. So, that's one kind of big piece to it, is just that sacred space. And so what's beautiful about like on our trips is that we hype this up, even from the moment we get there, like, here's what we're doing this weekend. And, we're going to do this and this, we're going to have fun and we're going to play games, but we're also going to have a ceremony on Saturday night and maybe Friday night too. And this is what it's going to mean. And this is how we're going to approach it. And for the boys and the dads are going to be going through this, we want to make sure that they can enjoy and remember this experience as something that was very special. And what's wonderful about those ceremonies is you've got young kids sitting in there watching or being a part of this kind of from a distance that get super excited about their opportunity in the future to go through that as well. I mean, one of our ceremonies it's a page ceremony. Dad takes a base wooden sword and then fashions it in such a way that it becomes very symbolic and it's unique and it's specific to their son. And then they present that to them along with a blessing and along with a commitment, in essence, a covenant to train them. And I can hear the boys, as soon as we're done with the ceremony, that have been sitting out watching this, leaning over to their dad saying, when I get my sword, when do I get to go through that? So they recognize the significance. And yes, there is something tangible they're receiving in that, but it's so much more than that. And to go just one step further, I mean, my son, both my sons now have been through that ceremony. And so they have in their room, their sword hanging up. It's right as you come in. You can't mistake it. It's right there. And then right next to it is a covenant that I made with them to be their guide, their pace setter and their leader, and to allow God to fill in the areas where I'm going to fall short with his grace and mercy. And I've dated it. I've signed it, their names on it, so they can read that. And they, that was my commitment, my covenant to them. And they know that. So they can call me out on that if I'm not fulfilling that role, So those two tangible pieces continue to remind them of that moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I hear a number of things: sacred space that's different, not the usual. And my mind is going to just how casual we've become in our current society. And I'm not Don't mistake me here, you, Eric, or listeners, that I want to go back to the Mayberry days because they were idyllic and perfect. But nonetheless, we've certainly become much more casual in how we approach everyday life, from dress to conversation to our posture, our engagement, and this gives us reason to pause and step back. Like, even using the wedding example, I'm thinking, well, we get dressed up for weddings. How many times do we get dressed up for things today? Again, we've gotten so casual, and even weddings are more casual now too, but there's still that sense of I'm getting myself prepared to be part of this ceremony because it's different, it's sacred. And then you also mentioned memorable, and part of it is the emotional connection. Part of it is the what's bestowed in that ceremony to the recipients or to the participants, and part of it is what they take away. The memorabilia, the sword. Why do we buy T-shirts when we go to tropical climates, or why do we buy hats, or what? Like, we want to remember it. We want a piece that reminds us we were there, and so that's what I'm seeing and picturing when you talk about that sword as an example of some of the things you've done. I'm also thinking about the potential skeptic that's listening, that's like, why do we need this stuff? Like, that's from days gone by. This is from like King Arthur and Knights of the Round Table. It's not relevant to today anymore. And so, like, I imagine you've had conversations with dads that maybe weren't so overt and direct like that, but you could sense this hesitation, this resistance for, like, why does this really matter? What have you said to them in the past, or what would you say to that person across the table sipping coffee with you as to why it does matter, even though it's not part of our normal living anymore?
Yeah, great question. Kind of going back a little bit to just this idea of the absent father post-industrial revolution. I looked up stats the other day. 35% of boys live in a single family home now. That was even 7 years ago, so they don't even have up-to-date information. And then of those boys, 80% of them are being raised by a female in the home. And nothing against women, but just as we said earlier, men need to initiate boys, not women. And so there's a huge disadvantage to the boys that are living in those situations, just right out of the gate. But then you've got the whole distracted father. I would say it's similar in the sense that they're just gone so much, they might as well not be in the home. And so I think what happens is, just over time, and my dad would admit to this. He's like, I remember when I turned 17 or when I started my senior year, he kind of had a moment of, oh my goodness, my son's a senior. Where did the time go? It just went away very quickly. And so we spent a large part of that year kind of freaking out, so to speak, trying to redeem some time with me, which I appreciated, of course. But I think so many of us, if we're not very intentional, just one day wake up and realize our son's about to graduate, and we have so many things we needed to teach them, to pass on to them, and then we've just not redeemed the time. So the nice thing about this very ritualistic and specific kind of ceremonial, these markers that we do, is that they can be, we start as early as 6 years old, and then incrementally they have times where they can participate in different things that really kind of are, they follow, I think, historically, much of what we would have seen in like the Israelites and the Jewish nation, much what we would have seen if we look back to, like you said, Knights of the Round Table, knights learning and taking on new roles. It just makes sense. So I won't stumble over that anymore. I'll kind of back up here. I think one of the things right out of the gate is that, and I mentioned this earlier, is that a young boy needs to understand they belong to something or belong to a group. And so our first ceremony is a life first ceremony. And really, without getting too detailed, the main reason that we do that is that we want boys to understand that they were created by God, and that God has a purpose for them within his grander story. And so the dads will give them a life verse that is specific to just the natural talents or the natural tendencies that their sons have. As an example, my oldest is very social, and we gave him Hebrews 10, 23 through 25, which speaks to just this whole idea of like not giving up, the assembling of one another together, but doing it more and more, even as you see the days approaching, the end of days approaching, as the days become evil. Don't just throw off the community. And so we wanted him to understand that, God may have a purpose for him to be a guy that's a rah-rah guy, get people together and encourage them. And we'll also want him to understand the vice of that would be to get people together and to lead them the wrong way. And so we kind of showed him the virtue and the vice of that, but encouraged him then that within God's grander story, God has a purpose. And that purpose very well may be for him to gather people together for the glory of God in whatever purpose that may be. So there is this kind of idea of, we want early on our kids to be connected with the larger group, and that is the body of Christ. 1 Corinthians 12 talks about the gifts that we receive when we become a believer. So we don't assume any of those kids necessarily become believers at the time, but we talk about it so that they can see that they have these natural talents, and yet when they become a believer, they become a part of the body of Christ. And some of them may be the elbow, some may be the hand, some may be the foot, but together and in that larger community, and focused on the kingdom of God, they can live out their role as a man within the body of Christ and be fully confident in doing so.
I've often used the analogy, especially toward that final graduating event, but I've used the analogy of sports, where there's the practice and then the tryout period. And then once you've made the team to play a specific role, and you've been practicing and you've been received on the team to play that role. That doesn't mean you got that role figured out yet, or you've mastered it, but you've learned enough and you've graduated to the point where you're ready to take your place in that role on the team, in the community, in the body of Christ, in the broader purpose that you have for which you were created. Anyway, just tying another sports analogy, or tying a sports analogy to what you've said.
Let me take it even kind of down the line just a little bit, because I do think it's important. At 8 years old, we encourage dads to take their sons through the page ceremony, which I've already mentioned. And that correlates with, in the Jewish world, a rabbi coming along and choosing boys to come under his fold to be taught, to potentially become a rabbi, become a teacher. And, we can see that those that were passed over just went back and learned their dad's trade. Those that were chosen then went and learned the deeper, not mysteries, but just the deeper truths of the Torah and that sort of thing. And so we highlight that at that time period, because we recognize that that's an important time where boys shift in their brains from just black and white thinking to more abstract thinking. So they can start to understand and start to consider deeper thoughts and questions. Their reasoning starts to change just a little bit. And so it's a really excellent time for the dad to say, I know that it's all been do this, don't do this, because I said so or whatever. But now I want to take you down the path of helping you understand the gospel, practically speaking. I want to help you understand who Jesus is beyond just the basic stories you're getting in Sunday school. And I'm committing to doing that. And so that is part of the reason we do that at that age. And it's important for dads to understand that if they are trying to continue doing what their sons, what they were doing when they were 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever years old, if they're trying to do that when they're between 8 and 13, good luck. It's just not going to work as well, or you're stunting their growth, so to speak. So start to work on introducing them to different types of character. We ask them questions related to apologetics. Why do you think this exists, and why do you think God exists? And we want them to start to think about that a little bit. And maybe we don't go super deep with that, but we want them to understand basic truths that maybe take a different kind of thinking. So now when we get to the age of 13, we go through a squire ceremony. And as you would probably guess, that's also when somebody would go through a bar mitzvah about that age. And so we want to make sure that the boy understands that there's a point where dad is not going to stop teaching them or guiding them, but they are going to learn. They're going to have to learn to take more responsibility. They've been given truth. It's been reinforced. And now they need to step into a role where they go, okay, I need to start living this out. It needs to go from my head to my heart and then out through my hands. And so we have kids, we challenge them. The ceremonies before that have been largely, they've been receiving things. They've been receiving a blessing. They've been receiving a covenant. They've been receiving a sword. But now we want them to try to step into this realm of, okay, this is what we stand for. We stand for truth, for purpose, for faith, for legacy. We have these manhood principles. Are you willing to commit to starting to live these out? We understand you've got to figure things out in the sense of processing and all of that, but are you willing now to be more responsible and just kind of take your dad out of the fold a little bit and make you kind of step into the game, so to speak. And so that's an important switch. Again, if a dad or a mom, but specifically a dad is expecting their son to just obey them because they said so, and then not give them opportunities to fail and not give them responsibilities. And again, we're stunting them and their growth towards manhood. So that's a great ceremony for dads to experience as well, because they're basically committing to allowing their son to step into that space more freely, even if it's a little bit dangerous, if that makes sense. We can't coddle our kids forever. It just doesn't work. And I think one interesting thing, and that I'll add to that specific time frame too, is there's got to be some work done on the mother-son relationship. Not that it has to be completely severed. I don't mean that in a bad way, but there needs to be some separation. My son is 12 now, and he is hitting puberty just on the front end of this. And I can tell just in how he's starting to react emotionally to things, even how he's kind of reacting to his mother a little bit in a way that's kind of seemingly rebellious. But I really think it's important for him and for my wife to have a process of separation. Not that she stops being a mother, but that she allows me to step in that father role, but more specifically in that manhood and masculine role, to guide him through these years that they're already going to be awkward, but he needs me to come in there and to help guide him through that, not his mother. So, and she needs to give him space enough to deal with some of that awkwardness and not try to hold him back. So I think there's something really specific to be said about that mother and son relationship around that age. One thing I read you may have read this too, but there is a rite of passage where a son or a boy fasts from milk for a considerable period of time, 3 months. And really it's symbolic of the mother and son relationship. That's how she nourished him as a baby. And so for him to fast from milk is saying, I don't need my mother to continue to nourish me in that way. And that seems harsh. And certainly it could be more harsh. He could do other things. But the beauty of that is that when he becomes goes through his manhood rite of passage, one of the things he immediately does is he goes out and kills an animal, dresses it, and then prepares a meal for his mother and brings it to her, in thankfulness for what she has done. So he had this separation, but he also has this kind of, I've not walked away from you. You are everything to me in the sense of what you've done for me all these years. But now I'm coming back to you, having gone through a rite of passage, become a man, and now I can give you this and not feel dependent on you, but it actually can serve you. So anyways, I think that's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, it's so good, man. There's so much in what you just said that I'd love to comment on, and I won't indulge on our listeners' patience that much. but let me hit a couple of things and maybe try to zoom out a little bit and tie it together. So this whole journey that a boy goes on to become a man is a series of transitions. And the ceremonies represent both the marker of what's past and an invitation to step into what's next. And I can tell you from my own experience, I was surprised, and I was not expecting just how beneficial the process would be for me to continue to see my boys in transition where my role is changing and my hands as a dad need to come off more and more and more, and invite them to step into more and more of owning their own decisions, owning their own development. I wanted to give them what I didn't have, but I didn't realize how beneficial it would be for me as a dad, as cues and guides along the way for me to be like, I got to change too. My role is changing and I have to treat my boys differently. At the same time, what can sound very controversial and out of touch with today's culture in the words that you just used goes back to millennia of historical context and tradition and wisdom and experience of the boy separating from mom, from the need to be nurtured to growing into that God wiring of dominion and protection and provision, and not in a chauvinistic or a sexist way, but just owning the masculine and moving away from the feminine. And when the dad's there to guide, great. But what we've had is an epidemic of dads don't know what to do, or they're completely disengaged, and so the feminine persists. I won't riff on that anymore. All that to say, in my own experience, my wife benefited similarly from the process because it was a marker and a reminder for her that she needs to treat the boys different as well, that she needs to let go, that she needs to let them experience some of their strength and power and danger, and take her nurturing instincts away and let them go. So I love the way you said it, and I'm affirming that in our own journey that we both experienced an unintended benefit for ourselves as a reminder and as a cue to let our boys continue to transition and to treat them differently. And so anyway, just again, lots of different things that I could comment on, but that's what stands out from personal experience, that's what that's what we've realized. And like I said, it was an unexpected benefit.
Yeah. And so I'm just stepping into that with my 12-year-old, so Lauren, my wife, we'll have that opportunity in some form or fashion. We need to talk it through just a little bit, but I do want to make sure that there is something that she can do with him to communicate that. So it doesn't need to come from me. It needs to come from her.
Yeah.
In that right understanding that it is time for him to latch on to me. The problem is that when the dads aren't available or willing or intentional about kind of helping their sons through this kind of awkward transition from being a boy to an adolescent, eventually a man, they're going to get it somewhere. And Netflix is happy to help you. Gangs, however you want to define them, but groups of friends that maybe one or two of them are just a year or two older and they claim to know everything. They don't know everything.
That's right.
But they're willing to share and to pull those kids along with them. I think it's important. I mean, there's two ceremony or rites of passage types. So you've got one type that moves a person towards independence, and you've got another that moves them towards rebellion. And it doesn't take us long to figure out which ones, move kids towards rebellion, drugs and sex and alcohol and all that sort of thing, come into play there, along with other things. So it's just important that, just kind of going back to your original, like, why does this matter? Just super important that you don't let the secular world do your job for you. That means even the youth pastor should not do your job for you. It needs to be your job. This, children are a blessing from the Lord. This is your role as a man to do this. I don't want to stand before God and be like, yeah, I just got too busy, or I didn't know what to do, or I wasn't, used the word earlier, being a pace setter. So I had nothing to pass on. We have to step into that space boldly and be able to pass ourselves on. So
the desire to experience and receive this is wired into a boy, which is why they go looking for it. And if they're not going to find it in their own father, they will find it somewhere. And chances are it's not going to be healthy or godly. And chances are high that it's going to be potentially destructive to themselves and those around. Like, all you got to do is look in the prisons today and find evidence of what happens when boys don't know what it means to be a man and don't know how to get there. And so, to your point, if we as fathers, whether unknowingly or intentionally, outsource this, either to the youth pastor or to the school or to the athletic coach or anybody else that the boy is going to find that will help answer those questions that surface during these years of who am I, what is my purpose, what does it mean to be a man? If we outsource that, then things don't go well. And we got plenty of evidence to that effect. And so I like, that's the term that I often use, as outsource. You said it a different way, but it's essentially saying the same thing.
Yeah. And there's a great documentary, if you haven't watched it, called The Work. Have you watched that? Man, what a powerful documentary of Folsom prison system, just showing you the results of either an absent or just improper fatherhood, just men not passing on manhood in the right way. Mm-hmm. And it messes people up. Thank God for folks getting in there and helping those guys through some of those emotional issues. But man, it's tough to watch that.
That's right.
But very necessary, I think, for each dad.
Yeah. So let me take you down this path and move us toward wrapping this up. So for the guy that's listening that is like, what you guys are talking about sounds really cool. It actually sounds moving to me. I've participated in some ceremonies. Maybe it's like a championship trophy ceremony, or I can go back to graduation, or I'm recalling some ceremonies that I've experienced or witnessed, and like I just don't know how to do that for my boy. What would you suggest as just a small step or an initial step to get started and to get some momentum going for that guy?
Well, if he's got a group, even if it's a small group of 3 or 4 men that are like-minded, I'd encourage him to just get together with a small group of guys that can talk about what they believe is biblical manhood and how they would like to convey that to their boys. And I don't know any ages, but I would say that I've had people that have come into this kind of in the middle or even late. And I tell them, we've got a limited number of ceremonies and rites of passage. It doesn't mean that because they're not 6 years old that you can't bestow on them a life verse. You absolutely can do that. And really kind of the key behind that is you're just blessing you're blessing your son. Every boy needs to receive the blessing of his father. So at the very minimum, being able to bless your son is extremely important in my opinion. So, and then, we fleshed some of this stuff out, made it, I think it's super cool and all that. And we also have not tried to take it to a point where it's flashy or showy. But we try to keep it simple, but we want it to be memorable. There's a great book, and I have no ties to it. I just read it. It's called The Power of Moments. And so if you just want a good book, it's a secular book on just setting the stage for moments, it's a great read. And I encourage dads to read that. I personally read Raising a Modern Day Knight originally, and that's one of the key books that really kind of got my juices flowing. So, and that was a Robert Lewis book. He's out of Arkansas, and he created a men's fraternity. Originally, the Bible study that I went through, I think was just called Authentic Manhood. I think it's called a 33 series now. But my experience with a ceremony came from that book. My Campus Crusade leader at Oklahoma State, we walked through that as a small group, and then he put together a manhood ceremony. And we stood around, we played games, and then we stood around a fire and all took our shirts off and painted our chest, and then he said a few words and then said, "You guys are now men," and it wasn't anything that was just like, it was the first time he'd ever done it, so, but at the time I was like, wow, okay, now I literally have a day in history where I can say I became a man. And it wasn't necessarily my dad that did that, but it was still a day that I could mark down as I'm a man, and so it was very special. So I would say that a small group of men have a couple of maybe books that they can read, but then are founded on what biblical manhood looks like, and then we'll create something unique to whatever their group wants, but that conveys the message that they're wanting to convey. So bless your kid, for sure. Tie him to the story that God has, the plan that God has for his life, even though it may not be fully realized yet. Make a formal commitment to train your son, and then make a commitment to God that you will be in the Word regularly and praying regularly so that you can read and pray and then share those things with your son. And then find a natural point in that boy's life to tell him that he needs to step up and he needs to step into his role, not without your guidance, but that because you'll still be there with him, but that he needs to step into a space and take some chances. So that on a very, very basic level, that's what I would encourage. I do think that and I've seen other organizations do this, where they just have a one-time ceremony. The fathers and the sons go through maybe like a 1 or 2 week thing, and then it's like, here's a ceremony, and then that's it. I don't believe that is the way that it should be done. I believe that this is a process that should go over a period of time. I mean, if your son's 17, you could still have a year and a half with that boy, walking through a process. Another really, really good book by John Tyson is called The Intentional Father. And just some really, really great information. He walks through his time with his son from the age of about 12 to 18, just how he poured his life into him, how he focused on what he valued and made sure his son understood that they made time to have experiences that could fortify the things they had learned. I think that's a wonderful text. I will be honest that is one man's that's his experience with his son, reproducing exactly with what he did. It may be unattainable,
Yeah, he's pretty intense.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it's a great template. And what I did is I summarized that book, and I put it in a PDF file on our website, with kind of my flair on it. And it's called the Manhood Formation Plan. And I'd encourage anybody to go pull it off there and read through that, even if they're not going to read that book. So that would be just another resource. I hope that's answering your question. I mean, it's, when you think about it, it can seem daunting. It really can. But I do think on the very, very basic level, what I said about passing on a blessing, making a commitment, giving your son some some of the reins to make mistakes and to try out what he's been taught are all very, very good. But nothing will ever replace the fact that if you're just consistently in the Word and you're consistently praying, then you're going to be discipling your kid, as long as you're letting the Holy Spirit work through your life. The Lord will make men out of your boys, if you'll raise them in the Bible, and in the truth.
I think one of the things that is a way to capture a father's heart and desire in here is to invite them to cast a bigger picture for who their boy is becoming. All along the way, point them toward something bigger. We talk in this country, maybe not so much anymore, but we talk about the American dream, right? Like, it was something that drew people to the shores of this country to find opportunity and to make something of themselves. Like, what is the equivalent view that we can give for our boys to cast a bigger vision for what's possible, what's out there, what's unfolding, what has God written into them that is yet to happen? And as a dad, you can begin to call that out. And probably you didn't get it from your dad. If you did, you're lucky. You're one of the lucky few that actually experienced. Even those of us that had great fathers didn't get this vision casting and rite of passage and ceremony experience by and large. But what a gift that you can give to your boy, to be able to cast a vision for who he is becoming, who he was created to be and will live into. And then, like you and your covenant, to be a guide for him along the way and to be able to launch him. Like, that stirs something in me. It's what spurred me on this journey 20 years ago. And I think it stirs something in other fathers as well, like just capturing that emotion and that excitement of what's possible for your boy, and what could you do to lean in and invest. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be scripted by somebody else. To your point, be intentional. and invite the Holy Spirit into the process on a regular basis, and then just see what can happen. Like there's adventure there, right? You can, listeners, you can't see me, but Eric and I are smiling and nodding our heads here. Like there's adventure that we can be a part of and we can invite our boys into. And boy, that gets me excited.
I've always wanted, our ministry is kind of growing just organically, but I've always thought if we ever made a promo video, what I would imagine that looking like at some level would be a father and a little boy in getting out of their car with all their gear, and the dad is putting on basically 100% of it, and he's pointing to this peak that looks 1,000 miles away, but he says that's where we're headed. And he's carrying all that gear, and that little boy's tripping over rocks and playing with frogs, and they're having a good time. And then they get to a stream, and he maybe teaches the kid how to fish a little bit, or they get to an area to set up their tent. He teaches them how to build a fire, and then he takes his a smaller pack, out of his back, and he puts it on the kid, and he gives them that fire starter, and he gives them that fishing pole, and they keep going, and maybe they come to another crossing where they have another obstacle to get over. The dad teaches them how to do that. And the next time they have to do that, the boy actually then says, oh, let me try that this time, and does that. And as they go, the dad's getting older, and he's giving a little bit more of his pack to his son until they're almost just walking, instead of walking, father in front of the son, they're walking side by side. And I imagine as they get up close to that peak, that now the boy has taken a lot of that weight of that pack. The father is still there, but the son, and his strength is kind of just a little bit ahead of his dad. And he gets to the peak, as now a man, and helps his dad up, and they stand there and embrace. And I just had this vision of kind of the camera kind of panning around, seeing everything that they can see now from that pinnacle. And as it comes back around the boy who's now a man's face, that he's just a little bit older, has a little mustache or a beard, and he looks down and he's got his 6-year-old boy, and they're starting the journey over again. It just, that's to me how it should be, that we just little by little pass ourselves. I'm sure you've seen that picture of the dad. It's like kind of pixelated. It's not really the word for it, but it's a dad taking pieces out of him that are in block shape and putting them into the boy in front of him, just passing himself on one piece at a time. I just think that's a beautiful image, and it's what we should be doing, and celebrating it as we go. So
right on. Well, the dude is Eric Browning. The ministry is Sand to Stone. But the message here, guys, is there's opportunity for you. There's responsibility. There's an ownership that you can take as fathers to step into this sacred space of ushering your boy from boyhood to manhood. And there's nobody better qualified to do it for your son than you. Whether you feel like it or not, there's nobody better qualified, but it doesn't mean you have to do it alone. There are resources today that didn't used to be available. There are organizations like Sand to Stone. There's guys in your circle that are feeling the same thing and may not know that you are feeling it, and others are feeling it. It just takes some initiative. And so that's the challenge today, is to kind of set the stage for what could be, to whet the appetite, to directly challenge you as dads to step in and own this responsibility for your son that nobody else really is qualified to own, as you have the opportunity, and to just invite you to step in. And maybe we've inspired you a bit. Maybe we have educated you a bit. There's more information on Eric's website, stand2stone.us. If you want to hook up on one of his trips in the near future, I'm sure he'd be happy to have you along. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the course that we have on our website, thenextmanup.com/forgingmen, to help you construct a plan to take nothing and turn it into a customized plan for your son. There's other resources that have been mentioned. It doesn't really matter where you go. We're just inviting you to go. We're challenging you to go for the sake of your son, for the sake of our community, and for the generation that's coming behind. So there's the challenge. Eric, so good to have you back. Thank you again for rumbling with this topic with me, for the work that you're doing for all those guys and boys that you are positively impacting. God bless you in that work, and in your life as a father too, as you're continuing to lead the way for your own kids. Man, I appreciate the time, and just want to encourage you in all that you're doing to keep up the good work.
Man, I appreciate it. It is always a blessing you get to talk about this. It's obviously near and dear to my heart, and it's a passion. So thank you for letting me share my heart.
And guys, I hope this moves you into some form of action, whatever that is for you. If you pause just enough time, you know what that action is to you. If it's not clear, just invite the Father to guide you into what's next. But may this move you to action. And if we can be of any assistance, feedback at thenextmanup.com is where you can get us. Okay, that's it. Let's put a bow on it. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Eric. Same bat time, same bat channel next week. Adios. To send us your comments or questions, you can email us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. The theme music is by Jacob Stanifer at Jacob Stanifer Music, and this show is part of the NRT Podcast Network.